So I haven't done a sound check yet. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Okay, good. So I'm Rob Wynden, the CEO of Aloha Health Network. I've got a PhD in data science. Worked as chief scientist of informatics at UCSF for a time, and I've worked in clinical trial automation for a number of years at a company that we just sold to Oracle, and have launched this new effort about a year ago called the Aloha Health Network. And since the entire company's product line is based on data science, I suppose they figured it'd be a good idea for me to come in and give you a summary of what we're doing. There's about 16 people in the company right now, and in addition to that, we usually have 2 or 3 interns as well, so just a shout out so you're aware of that. And so I'll give you a quick summary of what it is that we're working on. We're located in downtown Oakland, and right at the 12th Street BART station. So patients today, they have a very complex task navigating their treatment options. Worldwide, this problem exists in the US as well. The available information is very, very technical, and people usually do not have the skill set required to interpret the information that they're being given and make informed decisions about their own health. Usually you have to go to a doctor. There's no problem with that, but I think the folks at Aloha believe that empowering patients to make more decisions on their own and guide their own care of themselves may be in their best interest. About 2/3 of patients who are completely unaware of what options are available to them, and most of them, in the case of clinical trials, they don't even know what a clinical trial is. And the information about what clinical trials are recruiting is highly technical. Some of them are early stage, and they may be very experimental. Other trials may be late stage, phase 3 or 4 trials, and they may be completely safe. In fact, already be proven to be safe and effective by that stage. And so they're basically just being offered free care. But people have a hard time distinguishing between what all the trade-offs are, and there are many. And the other side of that is that drug companies need patients. Their trials are historically and chronically under-enrolled for various crazy reasons. And so people need a way of being connected. So hospital and patient advocates, everybody in the healthcare system is all looking out for their own financial benefit. So your clinic may not want to refer you to another treatment at another clinic because they'll lose money. Or a payer may not want you to be aware of a system that you may want to be able to use because in getting to that system, you may be exposed to a competitive payer. And so everybody kind of boxes patients in based on their own financial goals. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I mean, they're for-profit entities, and in some respects, they offer much better care than a government-run alternative. But there's just not sufficient competition right now to give patients a fair shake in the game. And so the options for generating information for patients, they're not neutral. Everybody's got a biased information option for patients. I'm not saying it's bad information. They're not lying. They're just not giving the patient an unbiased information. And it's very difficult for patients to figure out what upcoming treatment options there are in an environment like that. And patients need an interface where they can work with their physicians and other healthcare professionals, talk about what options there are for them, get everybody's opinion, make their own decision about what they are. But the first step in that is they're going to need to know what all the options are. So that's kind of what the business of Aloha Health is getting into. Pharmaceutical companies need help identifying patients for their clinical trials. About 80% of the trials fail to meet their initial enrollment targets. This is a problem that's existed for like 30 years, believe it or not. 20% of the clinics that biotechs enroll for trials fail to enroll even a single patient or maybe just one patient. So it's not even worth opening the site. And they lose millions of dollars each day in a delay, which is driving up the cost of developing these treatments and making it less cost effective to go after smaller populations, which has a big impact on people overall as well. And yet, a lot of these treatments are just completely scot-free. So it's like, what's the problem? You're offering a free care to people. Why should it be so hard to find people for your trial? So there's the health departments and clinics also can benefit from a system like this. They can get access to a database of what patients are viewing, what options they have, how their electronic data relates to all the other electronic data that patients have. And they can help make decisions about where to open a clinic or what kind of clinic and what kind of staffing requirements they're going to have years ahead. And we have an interface that allows both the physicians and the clinics to access that information and make more informed decisions. The data will remain the property of the clinic. Aloha does not keep a copy of the patient's health records. Actually, it's a distributed environment based on cell phone technology. So the cell phones actually are where the permanent record of the health data that we access are ultimately stored. And we only access the information temporarily during the routing process. So we basically have a huge de-identified database where we actually don't know the names of any of the patients or any contact information of any of the patients in the network, but the patients have access to our cell phone app so they can receive notifications about the treatment options that are being made available to them. So obviously this has advantages with GDPR and HIPAA and the security environment worldwide right now, which is dire and lots of hacking and stealing of information. So we're kind of immune to a lot of that problem. We obviously security is still important to us, but we just treat that information as kind of a hot potato. We do have HIPAA compliant data during the onboarding process. We kind of temporarily access the health record of the patient as we're downloading it via HL7 or Blue Button 2 to their device and analyzing it along the way. But it's basically just active sessions that have access to the record at that point, which is a relatively small population. And then once they've been onboarded, we're no longer accessing it. So a system can reduce the cost of care by moving the financial burden of care onto biotech companies and away from the clinics and the payers. And it has the ability to send health alerts. So since we know what populations exist in our de-identified database, we can send out health alerts to populations of patients and tell them about new treatments, or may tell them that their clinic needs them to come in for something that might be of interest to them. And so I've already talked about the security aspects of it. And this particular kind of database is called a real-world evidence database, which is basically information collected about patients outside of a clinical environment. And I think you could describe Aloha's products as being an instance of that. So next slide. So basically what we offer are personalized resourcing for patients. And it's even geographically based, so we can route patients to care based on where they're located via the cell phone, because the cell phone knows where they're at. And it's based on the personal health history of each individual patient. So even though our database is based on populations, each of the mobile applications that the patients have is alerting them to treatments that are specific to that particular patient. So everybody gets a personalized view of the system. And that forms a personal health network. So that's kind of what Aloha's building. So the system's co-branded with hospitals. This is a hospital login screen that we have in Uttar Pradesh in India. And it can be rolled out for hospitals who want to offer this as an option to their patients and allow them to gain more control of their health information, which is becoming more interesting to different entities. Depends on the kind of hospital. Some hospitals lose money by this. Some hospitals save money through a system like this. And so whether or not they're one or the other kind of determines whether or not they're interested in their product. But we offer that seamless integration and kind of a frictionless onboarding system based on HL7. And each hospital can be independently owned, so we don't require them to all be coordinated with each other. We work with various single sign-on and identity providing companies, but it's all using kind of standardized technology. The base technology in our system is OAuth 2. And basically create a personalized clinical network for the health system. It's co-branded and allows them to connect, patients to connect to similar patients to themselves, find specialized providers, and which hospital professionals may be the people that they should contact. And the system provides end-to-end encryption and the ability for them to communicate with one another in a chat environment where they can invite doctors and nurses in to help them with their decisions. And So this is a little bit about our security and encryption. So this allows you to create patient communities, patients in particular, clinical phenotypes, if you will, using Mayo's technical terminology, is possible with this environment where they can meet and learn about each other and share resources. And so we do partner with nonprofit organizations that represent specific populations of patients to allow them to better network and track and alert them. And so that's also serves as an additional intake funnel for our company. And then we can make personalized recommendations to patients about what patient advocates they should contact in hospitals and treatments and lots of other things as well. So basically, we offer an automated data collection platform. It's HIPAA compliant and allows us to transfer information via HL7 and Blue Button 2, with Blue Button 2 coming online rather rapidly with the administration pushing for it very hard, which is helpful. And we're seeing real traction for this, finally, in terms of actually being able to get access to people's records. The NLP Engine, which runs on the phones, is designed specifically for unstructured text analysis in biomedical applications, and it can interact with patients directly and employs a lot of standard clinical ontologies and with just millions of clinical concepts in them. And we also have some custom ontologies in the system as well. Currently, the system runs in English and Hindi, and all the trials we're running right now are in the US at the moment, but it kind of changes. So we have a proprietary clinical database that we build with the system as it goes along. So basically, it's learning the more patients it treats and routes. You can often see outcomes as well. And so the system's learning about what works, and then it uses that to match patients to drugs and clinical trials along the way, and gets people to enroll in trials that are the most likely to be a benefit to them personally. And then it saves the biotech's time because this is basically a kind of pre-screen for the trial, so they don't have a lot of people coming in the door that are completely irrelevant to them. And we call this kind of fingerprinting of a patient, a clinical phenotype, which is something that Chris Shute at Mayo Clinic came up with about 15 years ago. And basically, it's the idea of describing a patient using ontology terms in a graph database. And right now, we convert all of the information that we collect into a number of very large clinical ontologies. LOINC, RADLEX, ICD-10, CPT Mesh, Rxnorm, SNOMED, CT, and each of these ontologies has grown to just massive size. They're huge, huge ontologies where a lot of medical professionals have labored very diligently over even a single term, right? So it just represents a massive amount of effort. And we basically, the only information we keep is this metadata about relevant ontology terms. So basically what we have with that from a financial standpoint in terms of the company is we make money by routing people to clinical trials primarily, although we're kind of branching out from that. But we basically have a trial enrollment engine at this point. It can generate a significant amount of traffic for a particular clinical trial. So for a clinical trial, we can probably generate maybe about 10 patients per day per trial, which actually in the trial industry is a lot. And this is an enormous benefit to patients as well as the biotechs. It's completely unbiased, so it's from the patient's perspective. Everything's opt-in, and so patients opt in on this individually and give permission to say they want to join the network and they want to be represented. So we're not grabbing data from clinics without people knowing about it and using it for various things. And we give patients an unbiased assessment via this AI of what trials and treatments they should check out in an environment that allows them to learn more about them. So we drive patient referral traffic. We're doing patients pre-screening of sorts for patients. We can help patients get to their first site visit and then hand them down to the clinic where they'll be consented and enrolled in the trial. And via the cell phone app and the fact that we've got their health data on our app on their phone, it kind of gives us a more longitudinal or rather long-term picture of what the health needs of the patient are even after the trial is done. And then we can survey patients even after the trial is complete, which is called ePro. So that's kind of an outline of the various products that we're working on. So this is all in a massive network. This is a ridiculously simplified diagram that was created a long time ago. But basically, there's an identity store, identity provider service, which I mentioned was based on OAuth 2. And we've got some engines that we use that talk HL7 Blue Button 2 and access health information at clinics and payers on behalf of patients. And if you have consent from a patient and the patient says, I want to request my health data, then these entities are required to respond within 48 hours with their health data. Recently, within the last year, the laws have become very stringent, and now those providers are required to give you access to that data electronically. Before, they would just kind of give you this piece of crap like PDF that's scanned, right? And then here's your data. So that's slowly starting being phased out, which is good, which is enabling entities like ourselves to step into the gap and start providing better services. It goes into an NLP engine. We have a proprietary NLP engine that we started the company with that was developed in the financial services industry for scanning banks and contracts and information in the financial services market. We bought that product and then incorporated it into the system, and over the last year or so, we've adapted it to the biomedical field. This generates named entity extraction and identifies ontology terms that are relevant with good accuracy, and then that goes into a phenotype database where we can then cross-link and find related terms and basically build a broader picture of the health of the patient. And this creates a graph that we can then perform population health database queries on. And then we create a graph for clinical trials and treatments as well. And we measure the overlap of graphs, and that's how the system works. So the goal is basically to maintain this database and help patients match to the best treatment options for themselves, provide automated pre-screening for trials in particular, and kind of help solve the problem of getting people where they need to go. And rely heavily on existing ontologies and the organization of those ontologies in huge medical systems called, like UMLS, for example, which keep track of the relations and cross-links. And basically, we also generate a lot of automated cross-linking ourselves as well. So I think I just mention a little bit of the challenges. So just loading all these ontologies is actually very, very difficult. Each of them is very, very large. If you load in all the information all the relations information in the ontologies that show how they related to each other, all the terms, even across different ontologies, the data balloons. It becomes very, very difficult to house. And there's very few products, actually, that are strong enough to house it. The system that we've chosen to use is called Allegograph, which is a company in Berkeley. That also happens to be the database the NCBO is porting the bioportal to. And we kind of draft off of their efforts because they help house and maintain and distribute biomedical ontologies to folks like yourselves, hopefully. And just housing this in a database that's performant and can analyze the data for thousands and thousands of patients is very, very difficult. So there's a lot of DevOps technology that goes into the work at Aloha. We're not able to use just your existing graph database. OrientDB didn't really cut it. A lot of the other systems that being offered at some of the online service providers don't really cut it. It's not an easy thing to do. The other deal is that the level of specificity of these ontologies varies pretty widely. They're all being just poured over by medical professionals constantly, all the time. There's a lot of updates. There's a lot of links and relations that are being maintained. There's a lot of metadata on each of the terms. And they're also being developed at different levels of specificity. So for example, LOINC, you find a child term in LOINC and you go up a level to the parent. And then they've got it related to practically every other parent in LOINC. They've put in so many relations in this ontology, which tracks pathology data, that it's almost that the cross-links need to be trimmed and reorganized and reprioritized because they overdid it to the point where it's almost useless. And then in other ontologies, there's almost no cross-linking, and there's a need for someone to to generate a likelihood of a link from two different named entities across ontologies and create a link where one didn't exist. And so, these are real challenges that we have to kind of deal with in building this in this environment. Some of them kind of grow organically, and people just kind of throw information at them. Even though the database itself is structured, is structured kind of format. Like in Go, the ontology for genes, it's, people just kind of throw stuff in there. It just kind of grows. There's not a lot of oversight. But then other ones like Rxnorm, which is based more on FDA approval and the announcement of a trademark and going through the FDA and getting clinical trials started. And so there's a lot of regulation around this because you're going to put chemicals in people's bodies. And so the ontology ends up being really, really structured and well organized. And so you're throwing all this stuff into one database and using that to build a computable background on a patient is difficult when the goals of these ontologies and the way that they're being built are all very, very different from each other. And also, how you handle updates is also a challenge because some of them are being updated at an enormously fast rate, and keeping track of that over millions of terms and not having to refresh the database from scratch each time is difficult. So that I think that this kind of aspect of the data science is what's most challenging for us. The creation of the graph, there's a lot of proprietary information that I won't talk about here today about like what the graphs are, but they're made of these ontology terms. But the idea of measuring the overlap of two graphs is not, that's kind of common. You probably have heard about that before. And so you can measure the overlap of two graphs and come up with a way of ranking them. That's basically what the system is doing, but at a very large scale. So that's just a summary of what we're doing at Aloha Health Network. I'm happy to take any questions you have, and that's it.
Any questions?
Thanks for the talk. I had a question particularly about the NLP process you mentioned. It sounds like you're doing OCR over it, and you're talking about like pulling named entity recognitions from that PDF. Is that kind of what we're talking about?
And we're not doing OCR. The system, we could use OCR. The system that we purchased does do OCR, but we so far have not had the need. The clinics are giving us real data.
So then, follow up to that.
That's a recent thing, by the way. It's maybe the last year or two. It's after 30 years of giving us scans, they're actually giving us data.
Yeah. So my question, I guess, then would be, what are you actually using the NLP for? And you mentioned named entity recognition.
Oh, the text is unstructured. It may be a nursing note, but that doesn't mean the nurse used a constrained medical term. Okay. Right? But if you want to build a computable picture of a patient, right, everything has to be identified as a particular term with an ID and a definition and a provenance about its update and who did it and where and why they thought it was a good idea of defining a term that way. And there's just tens of millions of these terms now. Yeah. Oh.
Hi, thanks for the talk. You mentioned that you have a data set of de-identified patients, right, Alaska. How did you get access to such data set of data?
Clinics ask patients to use our service. So everything's opt-in. The patient comes into the system. There's a HIPAA compliance form. They say, yeah, I want to do this, and then we can download their information.
Right, but then it's matched against, is the de-identified or no? Or you just de-identified on the mobile, and then you match against others which were de-identified?
That's correct.
I see, so there's no de-identified. Okay.
Hi, thank you for the talk. So I was just wondering if you have used any sort of soft computing methods when you were matching the patients with different clinical trials or different
Our entire system is based on graph database analysis. So it's all running around the similarity of graphs. Everything's matched based on that.
So do you use any like probabilistic soft logic for matching those graphs?
We've looked into it. It's more useful during the named entity extraction, actually. The idea is to get everything into a discrete term and then work from that. Probabilistic matching to figure out what term that might be, sure. But if we were to build a system that did a match based on, like a Markov kind of system, for something like this with a lot of relations, I don't think it's a good idea. There's been a lot of attempts to do that, by the way.
Robert, thank you for solving an important problem. My question is, you have many years of experience in healthcare. So 1 year ago, how did you decide to solve this problem instead of other problems? And also, what kind of other important problems do you think is important to solve in healthcare?
Oh, well, I think I got started on this problem back at UCSF. So I had this grant called the Ontology Mapper project with NIH for a long time at UCSF. And basically, we were trying to figure out, how do you map clinical data into ontologies. And it ended up being part of a big database. It's not a graph database, it's a distributed database that could link the 5 UC EMRs together. There's 5 medical schools. And we built a big distributed graph database out of that. And so I started getting into that. We got that thing off the ground with Nick Anderson up at UW. And then people wanted to use it for clinical trial recruiting, right? And so then you kind of get drawn into the next problem. I don't know. I've been working in data science for a really long time, but everything just kind of organically grows from the last problem, and I just kind of go from one problem to the next. It's not like there's some grand plan or anything. So I don't know what I'll work on next. I think this is a tough enough problem that it might keep me busy for quite a while.
So I'm wondering, is the application pulling the API, the patient database API, like every hour, every day, or is it getting?
It doesn't get updated that frequently. Yeah, if we know a patient, we can pull to find out if there's an update, and then pull the information down maybe once a month, and it's gonna continue to match pretty well.
Well, what about the mobile app? How does it know there's a change? They're identified.
We have the ability to send notifications without knowing who the patients are. So it's basically, it's not strictly like mobile notifications in the traditional sense, but in terms of like the way it looks to the person on the phone, it's kind of similar.
But that would make them uniquely identified.
Yeah, well, no, it doesn't, because we send it to all patients that need that notification. So it's just a different way of looking at it.
So as part of your footprint of each patient that you have, do you encode any sort of genetic information?
We're starting to get into it. Yeah, we're doing matching against lab test kits. So there's a lot of big efforts to build diagnostic companies around genetic information right now. There's a pretty big startup that Microsoft's backing, and we're working with them. And so yeah, we're starting to get into it. That's why I mentioned the Go ontology earlier, but we are starting to build actual genetic phenotypes as well as clinical phenotype.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of a follow-up question to the questions around de-identification. And I understand that this is like proprietary information. It's like, how do you do the de-identification? Is it, it seems like when a patient is part of a group, then they're put into that group, and then if there's any notification, it's sent to that entire group rather than a single.
That's right. Yeah, so notifications at the group level. And so long as the groups are over 5 under HIPAA, it's de-identified.
this area, but what is the competitive advantage over any of the other clinical trial matching type software offerings out there?
There's not really anything there. I mean, there's companies that are providing manpower that will help recruit patients. There's software products which will mine an EMR and figure out how many patients are eligible for trial in that EMR. And then they can try and market to the patients at that hospital, which is kind of weird. It's also not GDPR compliant because it's not opt-in. I don't know of anybody that's doing an opt-in based system like this yet.
Hi. So, if I understand correctly, your system helps bring together your different potential patients with treatment methods and experimental methods too that you might want to be around. From when you first introduced the system and having tracked how some of these de-identified users have interacted with the platform, do you have like a pocketbook of specific cases where somebody really drastically changed the way they sought out care for a certain maybe chronic problem they had or a medical issue that isn't really clearly defined that it should be dealt with one way?
So, since we don't track the IDs of people, we can't give you that use case, but our nonprofit partners tell us that this is happening. And so, for example, WeHeal.org, which is one of them, says that yes, we're having an impact in helping people be alerted. I mean, people may go to their clinic, and typically what the story we hear is that they're at the end of standard of care. Okay, so you need to look at palliative care, end of life care, and then the patient's like, wait a minute, I'm fine. I don't want to give up, right? But the clinic doesn't want to give them that information because maybe that particular clinic, and some clinics make 70% of their profit on the palliative care. So I mean, it just depends. And so they may branch out and start looking for solutions, and they might end up, contacting us indirectly through one of our partners.
Hi, I just want to check, how do you handle the liabilities when your matches go wrong, or if your matches go wrong? Is there a way to manage?
Every patient that's routed to trial still goes through regular human screening. They still go through informed consent. So we're not replacing any existing structures. All we're doing is making people aware of what options there are. So it's upstream from informed consent. Once they've signed informed consent, they've written down that they understand everything that's gone into this trial, what the risks are, and basically indemnify the biotech and various parties that help them get there.
You want to tell them how many concurrent clinical trials there are in the U.S. and how that, the number of clinical trials makes it pretty impossible for any doc or healthcare system to be able to match the patient profile.
I think some of the healthcare systems could do it if because they're pretty large, but it's a very large number of trials. We're talking about 50,000 trials, right? So within any particular disease area, there's hundreds of options. So it's not an easy decision to make at all. It's very, very complicated.
Hi, do you think that having a database with patients with diseases or having this database will encourage new research into treatments that maybe they didn't think there were enough number of patients looking for a treatment?
Yeah, the RWE, one of our biotech customers is curious about using it for that. It's called PreMarket Feasibility, using the RWE data we collected. So basically finding out who didn't find treatment and what bodies of patients are out there looking for treatment that aren't finding it, that sort of thing. Yeah, eventually it could be useful for that. I think we'd have to collect data for a few years, get a more longitudinal picture, and then it could be used for that kind of thing.
Excuse me. Why did you decide to name the company Aloha?
Because I went on vacation and my wife liked the name.